Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'm going to be discussing the announcement, at last, the inevitable announcement from Boris Johnson that England is going back into another national lockdown, to discuss the political storm that has come with the way it has been revealed, and to discuss some of the implications that there are going to be, again, politically. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, pretty late this. Good old Boris has kept me pretty late. But a couple of things also, first of all. The audio may still not be absolutely ideal. Hopefully it's better than the last couple of days. Sorry about that. And also, for those who have been badgering for a podcast, I've finally been in one. Someone else has done the podcast, but I featured on it. I'll put a link in the description below if I remember. Hopefully I will. And that may become a regular weekly thing as well. But yes, the announcement. So the first we saw about it really is Saturday. Well, Friday night things were starting to emerge. Saturday's newspapers, the headlines were full of it. And not so much from the Daily Express, interestingly, but a lot of the national newspapers were carrying the news that there was going to be a new national lockdown, and it contained a fair amount of detail. And I had to wait around, of course, to see exactly what was going to happen. And then as the day went on, there was an announcement that there was going to be, well, an announcement, a presentation from the Prime Minister. And that was originally supposed to be at 4 p.m. And then it was, it's going to be 5 p.m. So there's me making sure we've all had our tea and we're sat in front of the telly at 5 p.m. waiting for this thing. We're waiting. I'm thinking, blimey, Boris Johnson always seems to be late. Always. He'd be late for his own funeral. And then the news came in. Oh, no, we meant from 5. From 5. Could be at any time. It ended up being something like 7:15, 10 to 7, something like that. And many hours waiting around. And I just think in that, and then again, just the main problem with this is the communication side of it has been very, very badly done. If you couldn't be absolutely certain that you'd be ready to give this announcement at 4 o'clock, why would you announce it at 4? These restrictions, we now know, and this is where the key difference is with the newspapers, we now know are intended to come into place from Thursday. Now, I have a couple of things to say about that, but if you're going to be talking about restrictions that are likely to be coming in force on Thursday, does it really matter whether you make your announcement to the public the previous Saturday at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock? No, it doesn't. So why on earth didn't they just say, look, rather than, set a time and then have to change it, why don't we just say 7 o'clock? Because we're certain we'll be ready by 7 o'clock. It looks really bad. The messaging has been confusing from the start. It's very likely this announcement was never intended to take place on the Saturday. I think what happened is when this story started emerging in the newspapers, you can imagine what it was like from Conservative MPs' point of view. They have already announced their fury at the fact that Boris Johnson, when we say Boris Johnson, we really mean Dominic Cummings, keeps briefing newspapers about major policy decisions. Instead of them, if the government have a major policy, even in an emergency, they should be announcing it to MPs first, preferably in Parliament. But, when it's a weekend situation, at least be contacting them. And I did notice that, as things came through, it was announced that the data that I listened to when I watched the presentation was going to be made available to Conservative MPs. And I immediately thought to myself, why not all MPs? Why just Conservative MPs? Is it because they're the ones you need on side, you don't care about anyone else? Again, very rude for the parliamentary process. But we, again, need to remember why it is we're here in the first place. There's a number of things I'm going to need to talk about with this new lockdown, of course, that can take place over the next week. The first thing, of course, is these measures are intended to take place on Thursday. Now, consider the following. The increase in rate is already exponential. This should have taken place weeks ago. There's been various arguments and counter-arguments about that. I'll discuss that in another video. But the government have been advised by their own scientific advisors to put this in place for weeks. It was inevitable, absolutely inevitable. He talked about his regional. I wanted to try this regional approach for us. And the regional approach is absolutely the right one. The argument keeps coming back, well, why would we lock down, Cornwall, which has a relatively low level of infection compared to Manchester with a very high one? And yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, you do want a regional approach. The problem is that our regional approach, this 3-tier system, is clear. That's the only good thing about this tier system. It's clear, but it's also rubbish. In the tier 3 is the areas that have the worst rate of infections and have the most severe restrictions. What are those really severe restrictions, right? If you want to go to the pub to drink, you've got to have some food with it, and you're not allowed to go to the gym. That's it. That is the most severe restriction that exists now in the country until this national lockdown. That was the problem. The problem wasn't the fact that he was taking a regional approach. The problem was that the restrictions were useless. The scientific advisors were saying this has minimal impact. It's not that it had no impact. Okay, sure, if you're going to reduce the number of people who go to the pub, or you're going to stop people, going in mixing in indoor locations in certain circumstances. Technically, the restrictions also include not mixing in households, but how do you police that? So we've got the position now where, as I said weeks ago, ultimately, what will force Boris Johnson into this lockdown, because he's going to have to do it, there is no way around it. Ultimately, it will be the NHS melting. The fact that hospitals will not be allowed to take patients. And lo and behold, what are we told by the chief scientific advisor and the chief medical officer? The projections are now that hospitals are not going to be able to take any patients, not just in the areas of the country they don't care about. In the southeast of England, by Christmas, they will not be able to take any patients at all. People will not be able to get hospital care. That's what did it. That's what he was told on Friday, basically, as far as I can tell, Thursday or Friday, and that is what has prompted this. But the fact that it was announced in the newspapers, Backbench absolutely furious about it. So then he had to try and say, there's been a leak. Well, I'm setting up a leak inquiry. This is outrageous. Absolute rubbish. The leak was about information coming out of a meeting between Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, Michael Gove and Rishi Sunak. They didn't leak it. Who else was at the meeting? You don't have a lot of officials in a meeting of 4 ministers. Who else was in that meeting? Dominic Cummings will be the only other person in that meeting. A leak inquiry? Who are you going to investigate? For goodness sake. It was Dominic. It's classic case of Dominic Cummings. What they want to do is not take the political heat from the fact that yet again they've briefed the newspapers about a major policy, and the reason they do it, there's tactics behind it. It's not a stupid thing to do. It's just an irresponsible, disrespectful thing to do. The reason they do it is they announce major policies in the press, gauge the public reaction, and if it's, the public seem all right with it, and more specifically if their own backbenchers seem all right with it, because they'll read it and comment on it, then they go with it. If not, they can just deny that it was ever a thing. I mean, it's not attributed to anyone. They just say, no, we weren't playing that. That has happened several times this year. That has happened several times. That's why they do it. But it is disrespectful. Then the other concern I have, so I understand now the government, unlike last time, cannot just unilaterally put this lockdown in place. I get that. There's going to have to be a vote in Parliament, but that vote in Parliament is going to take place on Monday. Why are the restrictions coming in place on Thursday? Why? Because you know what's going to happen. People now know these restrictions are coming. So what are people going to do? They're going to have their last hurrahs, and they're going to have their, Saturday night as I'm doing this, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because they know that privations are coming, so they're going to have their fill beforehand. It's incredibly irresponsible to do it like this. You have to have your vote in Parliament. That's going to be on Monday. At least bring the restrictions in on Tuesday. The quicker the better. And because the other problem is it's not just about people going out and being more reckless to get their fill. It's the fact that we are on that exponential curve. The number of cases and the number of deaths will have risen dramatically over the next few days. That's where we are now. A few days delay means a lot a lot of extra cases and a dispiriting number of extra deaths as well. And it's so unnecessary yet again. And I know some businesses will want more time to be able to put things in place. But at the same time, we have to consider why we're doing this. Because this lockdown is pitched for 4 weeks. It's going to last 4 weeks. When the SAGE advisors were telling the government to put this in place, it was going to be for 2 weeks. But let's go even further back on this. Back in August, when schools were about to open, the scientists said the number of cases is going to massively increase. They didn't say, don't open schools. What they said was, close something else down. Close pubs down. Close pubs down so that we can manage the rate of infection. The government ignored them. They said, no, we're not doing that. So a few weeks later, second wave, and the scientists said to the government, right, we've got a bit of a problem here. So now what you're going to have to do is close everything down for 2 weeks. And the government said, no, we're not doing that. Then it became public knowledge that the government's advisors advised this, to which then Labour and other political parties said, put the lockdown in place. You've been advised to do it. We will support you. We will support that action. Do that. Boris Johnson went, no. And he accused Labour of being opportunistic in calling for this. In fact, the Conservative official Twitter account had a pinned tweet slating Labour for talking about a national lockdown. It is no longer pinned. Ridiculous. So we get to the point where, like last, week or two ago, they were saying, right, put your lockdown in place now. You might be able to get away with 3 weeks now, and it'll cover half term. So if you have your lockdown across half term, you minimise economic disruption. No, we're not doing that. Then they announced the premise of, right, we're now at the point where hospitals are going to be full. And he went, oh, crap. All right, we'll have a lockdown. Right. You've missed half term. You're actually announcing lockdown right at the end of half term. That is a special sort of stupid. Then he said, all right, so what do we do? Do we lock down for 2 weeks? No. Going to have to lock down for a month now. In fact, some of the projections suggest it could actually be 6 weeks. Some of the scientists, while we were waiting for Boris Johnson, the BBC News had an awful lot of scientists, other experts as well, feeding their views into it. And one of them was discussing the fact that keeping schools open, which is, I think, very important, unless someone could come with very good reasons not to. And I've heard the arguments not to, by the way, but as far as I'm concerned, the scientific experts are saying, no, we'll keep the schools open. But by keeping them open, in reality, you're probably going to need 6 weeks rather than 4, is the suggestion. So what this might be is a 4-week lockdown that ends up getting extended for 6 weeks. Because remember, although Boris Johnson in his announcement did not explain how we leave this lockdown, he's very much making it clear, it's a 4-week one. But you can't just say that. 4 weeks is far too far in the future to be able to say it'll definitely end then. Now, don't get me wrong, there are others that do the same thing. In Wales, for example, that already started their lockdown. In Northern Ireland, they've already started a lockdown. They have an end date for that they say they're still sticking to. Now, you could argue there's a reason to say that, because it's you don't want people to sink into a pit of hopelessness. You say, well, we're going to have it up to this date, and then as it gets closer, say, well, okay, the R value isn't back low enough. We're going to have to be another couple of weeks. But what I'm saying is, they might say 4 weeks, they might even mean it. But if we're going to use this effectively, it may be 6 weeks. The reason the government are doing it is because they're desperate, first of all, not to let the NHS melt down. They talk all about the Nightingale hospitals. They're useless without staff. We don't have the staff. But really, what they don't want is to have to bust people's doors down at Christmas for having Christmas dinner. As the Prime Minister said, Christmas will be very different this year. Yeah, because anyone who tries to have a family Christmas dinner might kill their granny. That's new. Don't normally do that at Christmas, do we? But he does want it to be as normal as possible, and that's the reason for this. They know full well that if they let people cut loose a bit at Christmas, that it's going to drive the infection rate back up. But again, it's a morale issue. But those are my initial thoughts on the announcement. There will be further ones coming as the week progresses. It looks like I've got plenty of time to get them in because the lockdown doesn't actually start for the best part of a week after the Prime Minister was shown the figures that now make it absolutely imperative. But I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.